Hi, this is Peter Schweizer, and welcome to The Drill Down.
Host of the podcast, The Drill Down, Peter Schweizer.
Co-host of the Drill Down podcast, Eric Eggers.
So we discussed this on the most recent episode of The Drill Down. Great question.
Where we relentlessly expose cronyism, corruption, and the abuse of power in Washington, D.C. Hi, I'm Peter Schweizer, and welcome to The Drill Down, where we relentlessly expose cronyism, corruption, and the abuse of power in Washington, D.C. My co-host is always Eric Eggers. How are you, Eric?
I'm wonderful, Peter. I hope you had a wonderful weekend, and we're halfway through September, so things are picking up a little bit.
They are. How's the family?
My family's busy. We've got lots of children and lots of different activities, but I would say we haven't been quite as busy as America's favorite family. Well, maybe not favorite family, first family anyway. The Bidens continue to be in the news in many different ways. It's been a couple weeks since we've done much on the Biden corruption family investigation, but I think that there are lots of things to talk about, one of which I think prominently features Peter Schweizer himself.
It does, in kind of an interesting way. We walked into it, and we're going to talk about that more in a minute, but let me just focus real briefly on this issue of the Biden family, because what a lot of people, the White House will say is, this is, who cares about Hunter Biden? Who cares about the family? There's no evidence that Joe Biden himself ever actually got paid. He never benefited from any of these deals, so there's nothing to see here. If you actually look at the U.S. Code on bribery, what does it say? It says bribery not only means a politician gets paid, but if a member of the family or another person, a third party, gets paid because of an official action, it is the same. So just that's why when people say, who cares about what the family does, that doesn't really matter. That's actually central to the way that bribery often functions.
What this reminds me of, and I know we live in the social media era now, and so on Twitter you see all these bots, and so there'll be, you can tell it's sort of an artificial or astroturf type of thing when you see the same comment repeated by all these different accounts. Back in 2016, when we were reporting on corruption within the Clinton family, the phrase that we would hear repeatedly, not on social media, but like by all the different talking heads, no less coordinated, no less artificial, was there's not one shred of evidence. We didn't have one shred of evidence that the Clintons were corrupt. And of course, some people still think that the reporting that we did about the overlap of interest in the Clinton Foundation and the State Department and the money, the very real money, the millions of dollars the Clintons made off of that is just coincidental and happenstance. And I would imagine those same people would say that that's what's happening with the Bidens today. But that's why the news that's happened over the last couple of weeks matters so much. We now have, because of Kevin McCarthy, articles of impeachment inquiry being announced. Now, that's not the same thing as an impeachment. What's the difference? Yeah,
so the inquiry basically says we're going to use the full force of the House of Representatives to investigate. What we've had at this point is the feeble investigation of the Department of Justice, right? The one that's been going on since 2018.
Feeble's overstating it.
It's unfair to the word feeble, right? So you've had the Department of Justice kind of basically doing nothing since 2018 with David Wise.
And maybe we have some insight into why in just a little bit.
Exactly. We're going to have some insight into why that actually involves us. But then you have the second front that was opened, which was on Capitol Hill. And you had some great work being done by Congressman Comer, House Oversight Committee, Jim Jordan at Judiciary, great work being done at the Ways and Means Committee. But they were getting stifled. They were issuing subpoenas. They were asking for information from the government, Freedom of Information Act requests, et cetera, and they were being stifled. So what McCarthy has done with impeachment is it puts the full force and power of the House of Representatives behind the investigation. Information should flow a lot more quickly, and there's now going to be a coordinated investigation between those three committees, Oversight, Judiciary, and Ways and Means. They're actually going to be working together rather than working separately as they were before. So this is going to pick up the aggressiveness, I think, of the investigation, meaning they're going to get more information, but it does not mean that Joe Biden has been impeached. It may not even mean that he will be impeached. It's going to be determined, of course, by the information they actually collect and gather. And I think if they had a vote right now, they probably would not have the votes to impeach at this point.
And some people would suggest that just because they've introduced these articles of impeachment inquiry doesn't mean Kevin McCarthy is actually interested in pursuing impeachment against Joe Biden. It might just mean that he's trying to get the people that are holdouts on things like funding the government, people that would rather have seen the government shut down as opposed to maybe begrudgingly going along with the continuing resolution for 30 days. Ironically, I was somewhere in Tallahassee last night, and Matt Gaetz was there in a little hat. Yeah, because, in Tallahassee, they do, like, Florida things, and Matt Gaetz was there. And he's on his phone a lot. Maybe he was, like, debating with Kevin McCarthy. Hey, all right, I'm in, but we need Joe's bank records. I don't know. But, I mean, but it doesn't happen in a vacuum, right? Like, those are the conversations that are happening. So I guess that's my question is, how much do you feel like this signals the House is taking it seriously, or how much of this is Kevin McCarthy needs this to happen to get the stuff he wants to happen done?
Well, I think there's a difference between the committee chairman, I think Jim Jordan and Comer, and I think it's Congressman Smith over at House Ways and Means, are all in. They've been aggressive about this. I think they've gathered information. They've been fact-led from the beginning. Whether the House leadership, meaning Kevin McCarthy, is, who knows? But, it's not just a question of the Speaker of the House leading the parade. Sometimes they're forced to lead the parade. And I still believe the evidence that they've presented is already very compelling. They're going to find more. And I think we are going to reach a point where the center of gravity in the House of Representatives is going to say, hey, we need to proceed and have an open debate and essentially a trial in the Senate to assess these things.
And it can be one of those things, too, where you've been watching and kind of following the evidence, and you think the evidence is real, and you think the evidence warrants actual investigation, even enforcement, and it hasn't happened for so long. You might have been beat down a little bit by it and say, like, well, okay, there's articles of impeachment. How seriously should we take that? But then it's like, well, wait, also consider this. This attorney, who now is the special counsel, David Weiss, who had previously agreed for some reason to not a very big deal for Hunter Biden, was going to basically let him off with a sweetheart deal. Now we have an actual indictment on Hunter Biden on this gun charge.
Yeah, what do you make of that?
Well, I think, as our colleague Seamus Bruner has pointed out, it's the one charge you might have brought up that doesn't actually connect to or impugn Joe Biden. So
very astute point.
No, I think it's a great point that Seamus makes. I do think that I hope it's not the end of things to come, because as you've noted, as you talked about on a Sunday morning show recently, there are tax discrepancies and tax issues that I think could involve Joe Biden and Hunter Biden. I guess it's maybe a charitable point for David Weiss, because maybe in his previous posture he couldn't bring the charges in the one location, but now he's able to go into a different state, and so there's a lower threshold legally. I mean, I guess that makes sense, maybe. Or do you think it's more trying to buy time against the thing? Because I think at the end of the day, why we spend time on the Hunter Biden investigation on this program isn't because of his drug problem or the fact that he lied on a gun form. Yeah.
I mean, I got to say, my view of this is, yes, he violated the law, and they should prosecute it because he violated the law. Ordinary Americans are on that charge all the time. But I got to tell you, this has the feel of, you and I going and robbing a bank, and we get pulled over by the cops, and the charge is we were speeding. We were going 50 in a 35.
Which, if I was driving, is quite likely.
Very likely, believe me. Believe me. But in all seriousness, this is the crime that, to me, has the least implications for the broader country. We're doing what we're doing because we're concerned about the leadership, the corruption, what's going on in the country. A guy that lies on a gun form should be charged, but that's not what we do at the Government Accountability Institute. And when you've got all of this evidence that he clearly, in my mind, was acting as a foreign agent in both Ukraine and China, bringing matters before government officials, he never registered with the Department of Justice. That's not a technicality. There are dozens of people in the United States in jail for doing that in, let's say, far less robust fashion than Hunter Biden did himself. And I think there's also the issue of bribery. I think bribery is on the table. And to say we're going to do the gun charge, which I also kind of think, I'd be interested in your thoughts on this. If you're a jury, if I were in a jury and I was looking at all of these charges, the ones I would be most sympathetic for Hunter Biden on would be the gun charge, because what's he going to say is, I filled out this form, I was on drugs at the time, I checked this box, I shouldn't have done it, I'm sorry, please forgive. That's a lot more sympathetic than to say, I was on drugs and over a 7-year period, I was doing complex deals with foreign entities and influencing my father. That's a lot harder to dismiss and say it was just, a drug issue.
I also feel like if they've been looking into this, if the Department of Justice and Attorney Weiss has been looking into this for 5+ years.
Yeah.
It's kind of like if I tell my children, hey, you got some homework to do, you got clean up the kitchen, pick up your stuff off the floor, and make your bed. And I'm going to come back in 15 minutes, and we'll see how you've done. And I come back, and it's like you picked up 2 socks. And I'm supposed to be like, you got 5 years, and you got a gun form thing, the thing that was very obvious from the beginning. They've looked at everything else. That the evidence is there. We know that from the Hunter Biden laptop. So I do think it's buying time. I think you also have to, again, look at it not in a vacuum. So we're not looking at the articles of impeachment inquiry with Kevin McCarthy in a vacuum because it's also happening with the budget negotiations. I don't think we should look at the David Weiss charges in a vacuum because that's also happening at the same time. You've got House Democrats now coming out with information saying, listen, yeah, you've heard from some of these IRS whistleblowers, you've heard from these FBI whistleblowers, but we have people too, and you should hear what they've said.
Right.
So they're actively working to undermine the seeming credibility or severity of the evidence that's mounting against Hunter Biden. And so to that point, and this is where Peter Schweizer starts to play a prominent role. Look at you finally in the pages once again, years after the Clinton Cash stuff. You're back in the New York Times. Congratulations. But we have a bit of a he said when it comes to some of this testimony, right? And so we've heard from the Gary Shapley. We've heard from these other people. We also now have heard recently from former FBI agent Tim Tebow.
Right.
And so this is what gets reported in the New York Times. It says, on Tuesday, Tebow, the former FBI agent, sat for a closed-door interview, which he presented a blistering opening statement to the House Judiciary Committee. He said he'd been subject to baseless allegations of political interference. And he said he had little involvement in younger Hunter Biden's case other than, this is the key, to shut down the use of a confidential source who he discovered was actually a right-wing author whose information he feared would taint the legitimacy of the investigation. Do you have any guesses on who that right-wing author was that was potentially in danger of tainting the investigation?
Well, he didn't name me before the Congressional Committee, but he named me in the New York Times in May. And here's what happened. Here's the sort of the timeline of this. In June of 2020, I was approached by people with the public corruption section of the FBI and said, hey, we're, interested in public corruption. That's what we research. We'd like to, get some information that you might have in certain areas. We certainly share that information. These are corporate records, information that, is in our books.
To say again, we were approached by the FBI.
Absolutely. And we have done this before. The FBI has approached us before. We're glad to do it. We have other things that involve, congressional committees. Anytime there's a legitimate government body that's investigating public corruption and wants information, we are happy to share it with that authority. And we're glad to do so. So there's nothing, crazy here. There's nothing untoward that was done. But, what's interesting to me about Tebow's statement about, sort of a right-wing author, and this would taint, there are no right-wing facts. There are no left-wing facts. There are facts. And in all the work that we've done, they have never, ever challenged the veracity of any of the information that we put out on the Bidens about the Chinese deals, about the Ukrainian deals, how much money that he got, that he was getting, $1 million a year. We were the first ones to break that story. Nobody's ever challenged any of those facts and any of that information. And the FBI is an organization that prides itself on talking to somebody who will be helpful. I mean, they talk to hitmen, they talk to drug dealers.
Like, that's your job, is to deal with people who are aware of criminal activity. So you have to be criminal adjacent.
Well, exactly.
Not to call you criminal adjacent,
exactly.
but you're corrupt adjacent.
Well, yeah, you're corrupt adjacent, but also it's you verify the information based on the facts.
Right.
So if somebody who is a drug dealer gives you information and it checks out to be accurate, that's good information. This sort of, attack the messenger strategy that Tebow's taking here, it's interesting that there's no refutation of the facts. But also, this is the same body. Tim Tebow, of course, is the agent who, when Tony Bobulinski came forward with his information in the fall of 2020.
In 2020.
Yeah, Tim Tebow was the one that interviewed him and did not share that with anybody. He didn't share it with the U.S. attorney up in Delaware investigating Hunter Biden. There was no follow-up, according to Bobulinski. Bobulinski was not a political figure. He was not a figure that had any political profile whatsoever. I think, in fact, if you look at his campaign donation giving, he'd given to Democrats in the past. So I'm not buying it that he was concerned about the integrity of the investigation, which is ridiculous on his face. He has systematically done things to block these kinds of investigations. And let's remember, this is the same body, the FBI, that received a tip from Hillary Clinton's lawyer about this unverified dossier concerning Russia collusion, and they ran that up the flagpole right away. So it's kind of funny how we bump into these things.
So you would be considered a potentially biased source. Hillary Clinton's attorney would not be. Hillary Clinton's attorney said, we got something about her political opponent. Let's go.
Exactly.
As opposed to here's a guy who has previously got a career of documenting political corruption on both sides of the aisle.
Yeah.
And this is, to me, the key on this. So why were you seen? Why was the evidence that you were presenting seen as a potential threat? And to me, we've referenced Clinton Cash before, but I think you have to kind of go back to this joke, but it's not a joke, Trump derangement syndrome.
Yeah.
I mean, we know before it was scrubbed that Tebow's social media activity included several politically charged messages, including a retweet of a Lincoln Project message in which Donald Trump was called psychologically broken and saying he wanted to give Kentucky to the Russian Federation, right? He's no less of a Russian agent than Mitch McConnell's Kentucky is up for grabs because Vladimir Putin likes bourbon, obviously.
Yeah.
But I think the point is that and it's funny because Clinton Cash and the election of Donald Trump that Clinton Cash led to changed so many things, not the least of which is our relationship with mainstream media outlets. But it's not like you did anything differently. It's now any information that comes to you or comes from you is potentially seen as advantageous to Donald Trump, and therefore it must be eliminated.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing that's sad about where we are in America today. We did a lot of work for a long time with the New York Times and with the Washington Post elsewhere, and our view has always been it was the same position we take with the FBI, with congressional committees. Here's our information. Here's where we obtain that information. You can go verify it yourself. In other words, we don't use anonymous sources. We don't say trust us, and yet rather than actually evaluate the information, they want to attack the messenger. That attack, I think, is unfair in and of itself, but they don't want to actually deal with the facts of the information. It's become a convenient way to avoid relaying the facts. Everything that we have written about the Bidens beginning in 2018 involving China, Ukraine, the names of the deals, the amounts of the deals, the amounts of money has all been verified as accurate and true. And they don't want to acknowledge that because, of course, they've tried to avoid this story and not cover this story. And I think it's deeply embarrassing to them.
It's deeply embarrassing. I do think it speaks to a fundamental shift in terms of the level of engagement and curiosity on behalf of people whose job it actually is to be professionally curious. Your job is to, that's interesting. Let me go see. We talked before about the idea that Barack Obama lives in Washington, D.C. still, and maybe lots of people from the Biden administration, White House, go to his house at some point. But no one's concerned about that because to report a negative thing about Joe Biden would be then to add a positive thing to this greatest existential threat Western democracy has ever known, Donald J. Trump. So it's just not going to happen.
Yeah.
And that's really the problem. You picked the wrong time and the wrong family to own in terms of their... It's true, right?
Yeah.
Like if he was running against John McCain, you might have a shot at it.
Yeah. Well, I tell you, I think that the media has really overstepped. I think, their approval numbers are actually lower than the U.S. Congress, which is amazing when you consider U.S. Congress, I think, is at 18%. And it's only going to get worse because they have gone all in on this. And I think as more information comes forward, we were talking yesterday on Maria Bartiromo's show about this sort of weird missing $5 million that I think is something that the House should look into. And this is, again, not me, making a claim. It's very simple research when you look at it.
Well, tell people what you mean, because the documents do reveal a discrepancy of $5 million between reporting done, or the self-disclosures done in, I think, 2017 and then 2019.
Yeah. So Joe Biden, when he left the vice presidency, set up a LLC called Celtic Capri. LLC, and it's named after his code name for the Secret Service was Celtic, and his wife was Capri. So he sets up Celtic Capri. That's where he runs.
Dr. Capri to you. Put some respect.
So he sets up this LLC to run his income through. So he files his taxes with the IRS in 2017 and 2018. He says on his tax forms, his 1040 tax forms, that business in those 2 years took in $11.6 million. Okay? Very, very clear cut. Here's the weird part. 2019 rolls around. He's now running for president. He's supposed to release his personal financial statements, and he does this through the Office of Government Ethics. During those same 2 years, now he says, no, I didn't make that amount of money. I made actually $5.2 million less. He's filled out both forms. They were apparently filled out by the same person, it looks like. And yet $5.2 million magically disappears. And my theory is that it could have just been a massive error, but I don't know how you make an error of 40% of your entire income. I think what happened is he filed with the IRS. He doesn't want to be evading taxes. He wants to claim all of his income. By 2019, when he's filling out the new form, guess what? He's getting a lot of scrutiny for his son's foreign deals. My theory is they just wanted some of that income to disappear.
That's possible. I think what's also possible, and this is where the obfuscate story and kind of like intermingling nature of the finances between Joe Biden and Hunter Biden.
Yep.
You've got Hunter Biden allegedly paying per emails from Eric Schweizer some of Joe Biden's bills. You've got the Bidens at every turn looking to keep Joe Biden's name off of certain things, as they've done with the Biden Center at the University of Pennsylvania, where other foreign money comes in, and there's discussion about how much this can go to salary. And let's not forget, I mean, this has been another thing that has been reported on, but not really in a meaningful way by any mainstream media outlets, and as far as we can tell, not followed up in a meaningful way by any FBI agents. But you've got a confidential human source saying, I have been told that there are recordings of Joe Biden essentially like shaking down and saying, I need to be bribed, actually to the tune of $5 million from the person that was also paying Hunter Biden at the same time, who also was requesting $5 million. So like that's why that context matters then when you have discrepancies
great point,
and contextual errors, right? So
yeah, you've got $5 million from Ukraine, the allegation in the 1024. There's also on the Hunter Biden laptop, we know that CEFC Energy, this energy company, in May of 2017 sent $5 million, and it explicitly says in the email it's for the Biden family. It's not for Hunter, it's for the Biden family. Now, again, we don't know, is that $5 million is part of that money? But it's the sort of basic question that the House should be investigating when it comes to Joe Biden's finances. How do you go from claiming during 2017, 2018, we actually had $5.2 million less of income on the filing for your financial disclosure? It just does not make any sense.
And I'll just say this, as we wrap up, we've talked about Clinton cash and how I think it's also you can't talk about the Biden corruption in a vacuum, because I think you have to talk about it in the context of the Clinton corruption, and for this reason. Hillary Clinton is Secretary of State when Barack Obama gets elected. Hunter Biden is the son of the vice president. They have a front row seat to what the Clintons were able to do in terms of how much money they were able to bring in for their nonprofits. And also the only reason why they kind of got caught, because why Clinton cash was as successful as it was in terms of detailing the corruption, is because of the transparency and disclosure requirements the Obama administration mandated.
That's right.
Okay. Now, so you're the Bidens, you see the Clintons cash in, Hillary leaves because you're going to run for president, right, and then you're vice president for a second term. That's when you see Hunter Biden set up these business arrangements in Ukraine. It's always in the second term with China, everything else. And then Joe Biden leaves office. The one leverage he's got is I might be potentially running for president in the future, but he's no longer in public office. So unlike Hillary Clinton as Secretary of State, he doesn't have the same disclosure requirements. He doesn't have the same transparency mandating reporting. So they can get away with more, and they did.
Yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely right. And they offshored their corruption. That's a phrase we use from time to time. In other words, Joe doesn't take payments himself. The money actually goes to members of the family. They're the ones that collect money. And it's a way of creating kind of plausible deniability. The problem is that's what everybody in the third world does. It's not particularly clever or unique. So I have a question for you. Right now, the polls show basically it's 47% support the impeachment inquiry and think it's legitimate and needs to be done. 48% say, no, it's total crap. It's all politics. What do you think it would take, short of a video of Joe Biden standing next to a Chinese guy with one of those big cardboard checks? What do you think it would actually take to convince the solid majority of the American people that this is an impeachable offense? The polls already show that a majority, clear majority, up to 60%, think that Joe Biden did something wrong. but what do you think takes it to an impeachable offense?
It's a great question, Peter, and I was actually discussing it with some of my good friends on Newsmax on Sunday. I know you did, Maria Bartiromo, and one day I aspire to be a sought-after guest on a platform of that magnitude. But I appreciate the people that do want to hear from me on a Sunday. And so one of the questions that we got, they were talking about the polling that showed, is Joe Biden too old, right? And or do they need to move him along? And I would say it's not that Joe Biden is too old, but they might be using the age as an excuse. Joe Biden doesn't have an age problem. He has a corruption problem. And so whatever percentage of the American people think the impeachment inquiry is legitimate or not, to me, the more significant thing is the stat you reference regularly, which is if the American people had known about Hunter Biden and the Biden family corruption that Hunter Biden and his laptop represents, if they'd known about that before the election, then I think we have decent evidence to suggest that the election might have been actually quite different in 2020. And so I think that the American people now know how corrupt he is. So whether he deserves to be impeached or not, I don't know that people believe he deserves to be reelected, but rather than have to admit and own the corruption issue, they're going to look for some other excuse, which might be the fact that he's too old, so they're going to look for somebody. But I do think that the problems are legitimate, and what they need to find, I think, are the bank records, right? They need to find Joe Biden's bank records, Joe Biden's cell phone records, and I think we need to continue. They've looked into 6 of the 12 bank accounts connected to Hunter Biden so far.
Yeah.
So, financial records, phone records, see how they match up.
Well, there's a whole lot more space to cover in this, areas to cover in this, and we will be tracking it as we always do. So your final thoughts, is this opening up? I mean, if the Bidens get away with this, meaning there's no impeachment, there's no legal accountability, he gets reelected, however old he is, this issue doesn't matter. Is it going to be a free-for-all in Washington? I mean, is everybody going to start doing this? I mean, why not? Why not have your idiot kid start collecting payments from overseas?
So it's almost like no. The short answer is no. First off, if he gets away with it, it's 100%. I think we now know this. Your fault, because the investigation would have continued had it not been for Peter Schweizer
tainted by me
and his toxic relationship with Donald Trump. But I think honestly, I think again, Trump is the shadow that looms over all of it, and it's almost like Trump is the threat that you're trying to avoid, and so that's the rationale for ignoring everything else. And so I think in the future, presumably Donald Trump won't be the threat, and so it's like, well, okay, that's actually pretty shady. We can't be along with that, as long as it doesn't mean Donald Trump gets to be president again.
Right. Well, I think that's certainly a huge factor in the way that media is failing to cover this, and I don't think it's going to change anytime soon. Well, we thank you all for joining us as always. You can find more information about the work we do and this podcast at thedrilldown.com, and you can certainly find the podcast wherever you listen to podcasts. So thanks for listening, as always.